Sarah Caminiti, and I am the head of business transformation at Support Ninja. I also host the podcast, The CX Roundtable, and The Career Strategist, and the Career Strategist newsletter. I have spent over 10 years building and fixing and scaling customer experience teams, and I want to start with something that probably sounds familiar. You are a contact center leader. You care about your people. You've built a team that you believe in. You run your one on ones. You fight for headcount. You push back on unreasonable metrics when you can. And yet, somehow, your team still feels like the culture isn't quite right. There's friction that you can't pinpoint. The trust seems thin. People are doing the work, but they're not invested in it. Here's why that happens. Culture isn't built during your annual engagement survey or your leadership offsite. It's built in the gaps, the space between what you intend and what your team actually experiences, between the policy that you wrote and the way that it lands, between the meeting where you said, "We trust you," and the Slack message where you asked someone to justify a 10-minute break. Those gaps are where culture actually lives. And most of us are creating culture we never designed because we're not paying attention to the gaps. That's what the session is about. Not culture as a personality trait or a poster on the wall, culture as a consequence of the decisions you make every day under pressure. And the good news is, once you can see it, you can change it. Let's get one thing out of the way. Most culture problems aren't caused by bad leaders. They're caused by good leaders making fast decisions under real constraints. We're going to call these the three quiet killers of contact center culture. They don't announce themselves, they accumulate. And by the time you notice the damage, the pattern is already baked in. In a contact center, leaders make dozens of decisions a day that they don't even register as decisions. Who gets the escalation? Which team absorbs the volume spike? Who gets pulled into a meeting and who stays on the floor? When you're under pressure, and you're always under pressure, you default to your fastest method to resolution. You send the escalation to the person that you trust most. You pull the same reliable team into every single fire drill. You shuffle schedules to cover gaps without asking. Each of those decisions makes sense in isolation, but stacked up over weeks and months, they send a very specific cultural message. Some people are trusted, and some people are invisible. Some people's time is protected, and some people's time is a resource to be spent. You didn't intend that message, but you sent it. Let me ask you something. How many of your policies exist because you don't trust your team to make the right call, but you never say that out loud? Every policy that replaces judgment sends a message. We don't trust you to think. Rigid adherence schedules, mandatory hold times, scripts that leave no room for the human on the other end of the line. These things exist because they're easier to manage than developing judgment in your people, but they also teach your people to stop using theirs. And the cost is real. Calabrio's 2025 State of the Contact Center report found that 64% of organizations aren't prioritizing emotional intelligence or social interaction training, even though empathy is the skill they most identify as lacking in their agents. Meanwhile, 59% aren't providing ongoing coaching and support to help agents navigate increasingly complex interactions. We're building policies to manage people that we haven't invested in developing, and then we wonder why they behave like they're just following the rules. This is the one that does the most damage because it's hardest to see. You say we value work life balance, but you slack people at 9 p.m. You say we trust our team, but every decision requires 3 levels of approval. You say people are our greatest asset, but when it comes time to cut costs, the headcount is always the first lever. A Gallup study found that 29% of employees say they lack clear, honest, and consistent communication from leaders. In contact centers, where the work is already high pressure and emotionally demanding, that inconsistency is devastating. People don't need you to be perfect, they need you to be predictable. When what you say and what you do don't match, people stop listening to what you say and just start watching what you do. And what they see becomes your culture, whether you designed it or not. And here's why all of this matters so much. Gallup's research tells us that managers account for 70% of the variance in employee engagement scores. That is enormous. It means the single biggest factor in whether your team is engaged or checked out isn't your company's benefits package or your office snacks. It's the day to day experience of being managed. And here's the hard part: global employee engagement fell to just 21% in 2024, according to Gallup's State of the Global Workforce report. In the US, it hit 30%, the lowest in a decade. Manager engagement dropped even further, falling from 30% to 27% globally, with managers under 35 seeing a 5-point decline. So the people responsible for culture are themselves disengaging. That's not a people problem, that is a systems problem. And it plays out through exactly the kind of decisions we just talked about: compression, proxy policies, and inconsistency. So let's talk about the work that keeps your operation running but never shows up on a dashboard. In every contact center, there are people doing work that doesn't get measured. The senior agent who spends 15 minutes after every shift mentoring a new hire. The team lead who absorbs three escalations so their team can hit their numbers. The person who quietly updates the knowledge base because nobody else will. The agent who stays calm with the most difficult customers so their teammates don't have to. That's invisible work. And it's the cultural infrastructure of your operation. Research from WorkHuman found that nearly 30% of workers have felt invisible at work, and 27% have felt flat out ignored. More than half of employees surveyed felt that they feel only somewhat valued or not valued at all. A Gallup study found that 82% of employees don't feel their supervisors recognize them enough. And research from OC Tanner shows that because of the effort it takes to do the job well is invisible to the people who should be seeing it, you're just losing people. And you're not losing people because the job is hard. You're losing people because 79% of employees who quit cite lack of appreciation as their primary reason. And this isn't just a feelings issue. This is a concrete business cost. When invisible work goes unrecognized, people stop doing it. Burnout related costs from lost productivity, absenteeism, and turnover run an estimated $4,000 to $21,000 per employee per year. And in contact centers where turnover already runs 30 to 45% annually, with a replacement cost reaching $10,000 to $20,000 per agent, that math is brutal. And here's what I want you to really hear. When people stop doing invisible work, it's not because they're disengaged. It's because they're making a rational decision. They looked around. They noticed that the extra effort didn't change anything for them, and they adapted. That's not a character flaw. That's a system telling people what it actually rewards. We'll call this the trust tax. It's the cumulative cost of asking people to invest in work that you don't acknowledge. And every team pays it, whether they know it or not. And the thing about the trust tax is it compounds. Perceptic's 2025 benchmark data shows a stark gap. Only 69% of individual contributors feel psychologically safe compared to 87% of executives. That is an 18-point gap between the people making decisions about culture and the people living inside of it. Hourly workers, who make up most of your frontline, are even lower at just 66%. The people closest to your customer are the ones who feel least safe telling you the truth about what's working and what isn't. That's not a trust problem. That is a leadership design problem. Okay, so we've named the problem. Culture degrades through compressed decisions, policy replacing judgment, and inconsistency between what we say and what we do. Invisible work goes unrecognized. Trust erodes quietly. Now, let's talk about what to do about it. And I want to be practical here because you don't need another framework. You need things you can actually do inside the operation that you already run. First, you got to learn the difference between transparency and surveillance. This is where a lot of well meaning leaders go wrong. Transparency says, here's why we're tracking this metric. Here's what we're trying to learn from it. And here's how it connects to decisions that affect your work. Surveillance says, we're watching. And if the number moves in the wrong direction, there will be consequences. Same data, completely different cultural signal. Ask yourself, if your team could see the dashboard you're looking at, would it motivate them or terrify them? If it's the second one, you're not using data for performance management. You're using it for control. And control is not culture. Control is the thing you reach for when you don't have culture. 50% of employees say their managers don't create psychological safety on their teams, according to Deloitte. And only 26% of leaders are actively fostering it. That means 3 out of 4 leaders think culture is happening, but their teams don't feel it. The gap between intent and impact is where trust dies. Second, you got to rethink how you give feedback. Most feedback in contact centers is corrective and metric driven. It sounds like your AHT was high this week, your average handle time. Let's look at those calls. That's not coaching, that's an audit with a friendly tone. Feedback that builds ownership does sound different. It sounds like, I noticed you spent extra time on that escalation this morning. Walk me through your thinking. That question does 3 things at once. It makes the invisible work visible. It treats the agent as someone with judgment worth understanding. And it opens a real conversation about how to improve without making the person feel like they're on trial. One of the biggest shifts in my leadership style has been removing the person from the work. It seems simple, but it has to be a conscious decision that you make. Asking people to walk you through what they did tells you that you want to understand where that gap in the process happened. You want to be right there with them because you know that they wouldn't have made the call that they called if they had the right tools, if they had the right resources or knew what kinds of questions to ask or felt safe enough to ask questions. And so if you have them walk you through the whole process, you'll be able to spot those gaps because it's your job as a leader to fill the gaps. It's your job as a leader to give them the tools to be able to make those judgment calls that align with the outcomes that you were hoping to have all along. Now remember, 60% of employees with low resilience and low psychological safety report feeling burned out. But employees who are highly resilient and feel psychologically safe, that number drops to just 5%. Psychological safety isn't about being soft. It's about creating the conditions where people can absorb pressure without breaking. That's what lets your team sustain performance instead of just surviving the quarter. Just like you want your team to create a space for your customers to feel empowered to do what it is that they were trying to do in the first place and safe enough to come back and ask you questions or ask the company questions, you need to provide that same level of care to your team. They need to feel safe enough to ask questions, but also empowered enough to solve problems on their own. The third thing, start tracking what you're not measuring. Not with another dashboard. We have enough dashboards. With attention. Ask yourself 3 questions in your next team meeting. Who on this team does work that never shows up in a report? Who absorbs difficulty so others don't have to? Who mentors without being asked? Who keeps systems running that no one thinks about until they break? Then ask yourself, When was the last time I said something about it? Not in a generic way. Specifically, I noticed you've been the one updating the knowledge base. That work matters. I want to make sure it's recognized. Nectar's research found that 71% of employees said more frequent recognition would make them less likely to leave. Not more money, not a promotion. Recognition. The act of being seen. That's how inexpensive culture repair can be, and how often we skip it. And finally, audit your own signals. This is the hardest one because it requires honesty. Take the last 2 weeks, look at your calendar, your Slack messages, your decisions. Ask yourself, what did I actually reward? Who did I actually listen to? Where did I say one thing and do another? Your team already knows the answer to those questions, but the question is whether you do. Contact centers investing in career progression for their agents report 15% lower annual attrition than those that don't. That's not just about promotion tracks, it's about signaling that people's growth matters, that they're not disposable parts in a machine, that you value their success enough, that they are worthy of the investment. Let me bring all of this home. We spend a lot of time in this industry talking about culture, like it's something that you build with intention, a value set, a mission statement, an initiative. And those things aren't useless, but they're really not where true culture lives. Culture lives in the gaps between policy and practice, between intent and impact, between what leadership sees and what the front line feels. Culture is a consequence of every small decision, every untracked contribution, every moment where a leader either shows up or doesn't. We know that 84% of employees rank psychological safety among their top 3 most valued workplace qualities. We know that managers drive 70% of engagement variance. We know that contact centers turn over 30 to 45% of their workforce every single year, and that the front line feels less psychologically safe than any other level in the organization. We don't need more data to tell us that culture matters. Just the fact that you came to this webinar for this conference tells you that you know that culture matters. We need leaders like you who are willing to do the hard work and look honestly at the gaps between what they intend and what they're actually creating. You don't need another culture initiative. You don't need a consultant or a new framework. You need to pay attention to the decisions you're already making and ask yourself, what is this actually building? So I'll leave you with one question, and I'd encourage you to sit with it this week. If your team could describe the culture you're creating based only on what you do, not what you say, what would they tell you? That's the gap. And that's where the work is. Thank you so much for joining me today and talking about culture. It's not an easy topic. It's a heavy topic and it's an uncomfortable topic. But if we ignore it, nothing's going to change. You have so much power for change. Teaching your team that you're paying attention, that you see them, that they are valued, that has a ripple effect. Not only does that land with the customer, but that ripples into how they approach work for the rest of their career because they saw what good looks like. That is in your hands. Thank you so much for your time. I am Sarah Caminiti. Find me on LinkedIn. Don't be a stranger. And I hope you have a great day.